Welcome. Appreciate you joining us today. This is D&I One-on-One. It is a monthly webinar series this year. And we talk about different topics related to culture, inclusivity, diversity, and belongingness. And today we're talking about culture for people transitioning into the workforce. My name is Jina Etienne. I'm creator and host of this series. I'm a certified diversity executive, and my work is centered on something that I call fearless inclusion. And I define that as the freedom to be yourself and the ability to create space for others to do the same. I develop training and workshops as well as facilitate conversations and programs focused on helping participants connect mindfulness and self-awareness to their daily actions and words. The goal is to create this collective awareness around the intention for organizations so they can foster psychological safety, where inclusivity is expressed as an outcome and inclusivity is the intention, the outcome of that is belonging. Joining me today is Trish Foster. She was Executive Director of the Center for Women in Business at Bentley University. Today, she is a DEI change agent on a mission to help organizations become more inclusive for all employees. She's a DEI speaker, advisor, writer, workshop facilitator, and she's also a certified energy healing practitioner. I'd go on, but Trish didn't want me to give you the long list of amazing things. So I'll just say, I'll vouch for you, Trish. You're just amazing and incredible. And I know you've told me positivity and human connection around diversity and inclusion, that's your jam. So thank you for joining me today.
Jina, thank you so much for that great quick introduction. And I feel the same way about you. So right back at you.
Yeah. The Mutual Admiration Society here. Well, in one of our first conversations, Trish, you talked about generational divide. That was a phrase that you used. And I wrote it in my notes that you said the first millennials were challenging the older generations. Now it's Gen Z's turn. And when I heard that, I was thinking, wow, how are we even at Gen Z? I'm not sure Gen Z is on anyone's radar. But since we're talking about transitioning from the students, from graduating from college into the workforce, I thought maybe we should talk about Gen Zs. And while you're talking about that, while you kick this off, let's go ahead and launch our first polling question.
Okay. Sounds
so
good.
Is that where we are? We are at the Gen Z's challenging tradition and expecting different things?
For sure. So, I think to level set here, let's acknowledge that the oldest Gen Zs are already in the workplace, right? So depending on, what source you look at, Gen Zs, the oldest Gen Zs are around 25 or 26 years old now, okay? So but then we've got the Gen Zs that are still in college, and who knows what we're going to call the people who are coming up right behind them. That's still getting figured out. If anybody here already knows who that is, you can, feel free to name it. But here's what we want to think about. First of all, some people would be saying right now, there's always a generational divide. And to some extent, that's true, right? But there's always a unique quality that comes with every generation. And for so long, we were worried about millennials and their new expectations. Well, the oldest millennials are now, running major teams. They're really far along in their careers. So now what we have is these younger folks, mostly Gen Zs, whose workplace expectations have been shaped by some really critical factors. And as a result,
I'm sorry, Trish, I want to jump in and interrupt you for 2 seconds here if I can. I apologize.
That's all right.
I know the polls are only going to stay open for about a minute, and I think so. Autumn's, you're going to need to wrap this one up, I think.
Yes, we're about there. So the majority are 47% yes, 27% no, 20% not sure, 6% prefer not to answer.
So that is the 47% yes, higher out of undergrad. And so you were talking about somebody said, by the way, Gen Alpha is after Gen Z. That was going to be.
That's right. That's what it is.
You were so where were you talking about their expectations and where they are in the workforce?
Yeah, so I'm gonna talk about their expectations in a moment, and when I do, I might ask you to pull up a slide on that. But what I want to say is, I think it's really important for us to acknowledge these major dynamics that have impacted them and their life experience and consequently their expectations, right? And that is, let's name it right away. We all know one, this worldwide pandemic. So, and we've just got to talk about it for a minute. So many of these young folks were coming of age, were in college, getting ready for college, just starting in the workplace. And this pandemic happened and they have missed out on so much as a result.
Right.
And there are people who work in, you know, I used to work in a college, right? People who are working in career services in colleges will also tell you there's some immaturity that comes with that. And that's said with compassion, by the way, not even criticism, right? But because they missed these major life experiences. They didn't have the in-person in school. They didn't, and then if they've been onboarded, they weren't onboarded the way people were. And now the workplace is still really weird because companies still haven't figured out what working in the office looks like, what working at home looks like. Is there hybrid, right? We've got groups and teams scattered all over the country and the world. All of this is impacting these folks. So they expect, what do they expect as a result, right? Maybe, should we go to the slide for a minute?
Yeah, we can. And while we go there, I was, as you were saying that, I was thinking back to a client where there were quite a few people who never ever been in their office. So they've worked for a company for as much as a year and a half, their house. And so they don't even know what it feels like to work at this company. They know what it feels like to do the work, but they don't have this sort of experiential sense of what it's like to be connected to people in the workplace. That's part of this as well.
You are right on. And another great story. I mean, the stories are what bring all the data alive, right? So, I'm sharing stories like you are, but they're backed with the data and the research. And one is a young person who said to me recently, who's in her mid-20s, onboarded during the pandemic, worked for a year and a half before she ever met anybody in person. And she said, I had no idea how many wonderful people I worked with until that time we went in the office. Yeah, right? I mean,
well, it's interesting to say that because even when we're on a Zoom, if we work in a 500-person organization or even a 50-person organization and I'm on Zoom, I can't see everybody. So it's an intellectual exercise to know that you work in this big organization if you're constantly only interacting with a few people, and your manager will set the tone for everything.
That's right. And we know that this generation of workers, and you see it on the slide, wants flexibility, wants to be able to work remotely, treasures at a minimum the hybrid setup, and yet they haven't ever even had the opportunity in some cases to recognize all the benefits that flow from in-person work. So, I mean, that's why I told that story of the aha moment for this one person who thought she was happy at work and thought everything was okay and wanted to stay remote, and then realized when she went in what she was missing, right? So we do know, by the way, there are so many benefits. I mean, we're all, as a DEI practitioner, I'm a huge champion of the ability for people to work virtually because it does give people flexibility. And yet we have to be real about the downsides. And, folks on this call are concerned about, like, how do I overcome those downsides and help people still feel connected, still feel engaged, right?
Yeah.
So should we go back for a moment and look at some of these expectations and talk about them a little bit and the reality of expectation versus.
Is that the slide you're seeing? Because the one I have up is student expectations of workplace culture. Is that
yes, this is a good one. Let's stay on this for a minute.
Well, and there are a couple of things as I'm looking at it that jump out at me. Well, they all do, but my well-being will be prioritized. We are starting to hear, I guess, the rank and file in corporate America acknowledge well-being, but I don't know that I think and you're going to talk a lot about this disconnect, this gap between leadership and our students, and even those who aren't necessarily coming out of college, but maybe transitioning into the workforce from some other, non-traditional, students and roles. But this expectation that I will have mental and health and wellness as part of the expectation of working here, that's a Gen Z, Gen Alpha expectation, kind of in the, it goes without saying. And yet we have organizations that don't get it yet. I mean, there's a lot of lip service to these things, but is there a lot of actual experience where organizations are demonstrating this?
I think a lot of organizations are playing catch up for lots of reasons, right? And one of them is during the heart of the pandemic, everybody was focused on the crisis and what do we do to put band-aids on things just to help people get through it. So now we have to zoom out and say, okay, we have these young workers coming in and their expectations around how their well-being will be prioritized cover lots of things. They cover what are your benefits, right? What are your core benefits around health, around wellness? But they also include well-being, meaning I'm going to have flexibility.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And remember also that part of what is driving that is the tremendous stress that everybody in the workplace is feeling, but that this younger generation is manifesting the effects of really loudly and clearly compared to people who are older. Mental health crisis is a real thing in our country and in our society. And so they know that, and they know they need to manage their stress, right? We know that while in college, by the way, higher rates than ever are using the mental health resources that are available in college. So guess what? They have them in college. They're expecting them to exist again when they go into the workplace. So what are you going to do to support my mental health? Do we have well-being days? You know, do we have mental health days?
Do we talk about it at all? Is it okay to be okay? Are leaders walking the talk?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And they'll tell you that. They'll say, when I go into the workplace, I want to see people modeling these behaviors so that I know it's okay. And in fact, they even want employee resource groups of all kinds, of course, but they want employee resource groups around well-being,
Yeah,
around wellness,
yeah,
you know, around neurodiversity.
So sorry, I didn't mean to hijack the conversation on that bullet, but I think it's indicative of so many things here. Transparency is part of mental well-being, flexibility, having your voice being heard. If you know, so when we are ignored, we do not feel like we're part of something. We feel dismissed, and none of us feel good when that happens. So it's interesting, but so many of these all tie back to that.
They do, and we're going to share another story. Thanks for bringing up the I'll have a voice and be valued, because that's another good story to bring that one alive. So a really high-performing student, kind of a rock star, goes out into the workplace in the last few years, and she thought she had the world by the tail and really was unhappy and struggling in this culture and trying to get a pulse on it and trying to be mature and professional about it. And she told me all this. I mentor so many of these young folks, and she said, I couldn't, for the longest time, I couldn't figure out what was wrong. Why was I so unhappy? Why was coming into work such a slog? And she said, one day a light bulb went off for me and I went, oh, it's because nobody here really cares about me. And all my life, I've been completely spoiled because everybody has cared about me. So she acknowledged that. She was like, I had a family that cared about me. I had schools that cared about me. I excelled in school. They made me feel good about myself. And she said, nobody here really cares about me.
Or it shows up differently. Yeah.
Yeah, but in her case, I think maybe she was in a tough culture. Do I think the people on this call are from cultures that are really tough? No, I really hope not. But there are some toxic cultures. There are some tough cultures. And she left. She was a high performer and she left where she was because of that.
I'm thinking two things. One is that a lack of awareness on the part of leadership. Well, I know, actually, you know what? I know the answer to this and it's on a later slide, so I'm going to park that one.
Okay.
I'm going to go with my first thought, which is I'm an older employer. Let's say I'm a boomer, I'm a Gen Xer. I think we exactly have the kind of culture that you talk about here. Or I think, listen, I should, you come here to do the work. We don't come here to make friends, because that's the school that I was raised in. Go to work, do your job, and leave. That's all you're getting paid for. So she had very different expectations, and somehow her organization didn't get it.
I think in that case, she was right, because I know, right, we're not going to get into the details, but I
Oh
know
yeah,
a
of
lot
course not.
about, right, but I know a lot about the situation, and I think her pulse on that organization was accurate. Now, you just raised something really important. Do I also think that sometimes the expectations of the young people coming in are a little too skewed, and maybe they need a little tough love? Sure, of course I do, right? It's part of the journey, the
Yeah.
maturation journey, the professional journey. So I'm not denying that at all.
But I think it's now, how do we express that tough love? Because none of us learn when we get it right. We learn by messing it up safely. We have to be able to make mistakes in a way that somebody will help me understand the mistake that I made, help me learn from the mistake, and not feel like it's going to cost me something in this job or this team, or what have you. Um, and so, um, sorry, now I'm distracted by some of the things that came into the queue. I don't know if you can see them, Autumn. There's some technical issues coming in. But sorry.
That's all
So
right.
I think that, how do we coach people that it's okay to make mistakes? Because sometimes when you tell somebody they've made a mistake, it's a criticism, and oh my gosh, this place isn't thought. I mean, there's a fine
Yeah,
line between being too harsh and being not stern enough. I
there
try to pick
is.
those two words very differently.
Yeah. I would say, and again, huge question, huge topic, right? We could talk about just this one for the whole hour. I think that embedding certain values in the culture that help you give that constructive criticism and bring people along is essential, right? So again, you have to zoom out and do that. Are you creating a culture where people are encouraged to talk openly and give honest feedback that's valued,
Yeah.
so that these young employees coming in are told that on day one? Look, you've come into a feedback culture. This is what we do. And by the way, it's a psychologically safe culture. So that means, it doesn't mean that we don't expect you to make mistakes. Of course we do. But you also have to know you're going to get feedback, and you're going to be held to higher standards, because we know, guess what? We know you can meet those standards. We believe
Yes.
in you. You're
And
going
we
to
can
get
help
there.
you get there, right?
Exactly. We can help you get there. Yeah.
Let's go ahead and open our second polling question. This is one of our standard questions, because we want to make sure people can get their CPE. And
The
while
poll
they're
is
doing that,
open.
Trish, there's a book that I love, The 7 Hidden Reasons Why Employees Leave. I don't know if you've read that one.
I've heard of it and haven't read it.
But in the book, they say that trust in leadership is the single most important driver of employee engagement and commitment. And when they talk about trust, they outline it in 4 different ways. And one of them is something you just touched on. It's that they need to feel that you are going to give them opportunities to gain mastery. So they're going to be matched with a job that fits their talents, that will prepare them for the future, make good use of their talents, challenging, but you will also give them opportunities to learn and grow over time. And I think that touches on all of what you were just talking about, that it's okay to make mistakes, because that is how we are going to move you up the ranks in the organization.
That's absolutely right.
And
And trust is completely aligned with psychological safety, right? So if any folks out there are sort of wanting to learn more about those concepts, I think trust, empathy, psychological safety all belong in the same, in the same bowl, right? They go together, and they're all
Right.
essential to high-performing organizations to high-performing teams, right? A lot of people might be familiar with Google's research from a number of years ago, where their quest in the research was to find out what makes a team high-performing. And what they actually found out was psychological safety was the #1 factor. And what does that mean? That means people trust each other. So it goes right back to your point. It means they trust each other. They have each other's back. It's safe to make mistakes. So we keep coming back to the theme, don't we?
Yeah, and we talk a lot about in this work. I know you use the term, I use the term psychological safety. We throw it out there with a general explanation. But I think if you take the term away, you did a really beautiful job a moment ago of explaining what that means. Because I think we can get in our heads when we think about these are the things I need to do, checklist items. Like I'm going to go down this list and then I'm going to say, I've done all these things, therefore I'm inclusive. Yeah. And it's really about practicing and demonstrating and learning together and collaboratively. And in order for people to think that they can ask a question, that they can make a mistake, that they can say, I'm not sure I agree with that, or toss out an idea and ask people to toss it around and break it up and chunk it up and fix it without the shame and blame and judgment.
Yeah.
You can only do that when you see somebody else doing it.
Yeah.
And then they don't get in trouble, which tells me I'm not going to get in trouble. So we can like this idea all we want, and we can say you have safety here, but some things you can't say, right? That's not something you can just introduce people on their onboarding. And we practice psychological safety here.
So what you made me think of is leaders who truly are nurturing these qualities of trust and psychological safety. It goes back once again, guess what they do? They model it. So leader, if you're out there, tell your story of the time you really made a mistake and what you learned from it, and always turn it into learning opportunity, right? Professional development opportunity. Yeah. And so here we go.
People appreciate enough the power of storytelling. Stories aren't just, this is what happened to me personally, although I think to your point, that vulnerability is powerful, very powerful. But it can also be a story about last time I was on the team and I did this type of a project. We struggled here, and this is how we overcame that. So rather than being instructional, there are 3 ways you can overcome a problem. I can share a story about how I did that. And that does convey a sense of vulnerability and transparency, which builds trust.
Beautiful. And
I have on here, I don't know if you can see it, but the inclusive leaders, cultures, and employees impacts slide. I don't know if there's anything here. I think we've been touching on a lot of these topics.
We have, and let's connect a few dots, right? So first of all, let's make sure we let everybody know these aren't, Trish's and Jina's opinions. This all comes from ample research and data. And I really love this, their voice matters in that second to last bullet, because remember, we saw that is what students are telling us they're looking for. Mm-hmm. Okay, so students don't know to say, I'm looking for an inclusive culture. Right. But they know what they're looking for, and guess what? It all adds up to inclusive culture.
It does. It's not a checklist item.
Exactly.
I'm going to put this slide up here because you've already touched on these, and so I'm hoping we can make the point about how all of this is converging and creating a particular challenge as well as a unique opportunity for organizations. And you don't have to be the CEO to start to think about this. If you are a person who's listening and you are managing a team, you have direct influence on that team's experience of what it feels like to work in your organization. So it's important to identify some of these gaps and see if they show up in your organization and in your team.
Yeah, so what this slide actually does is shows you why there's a gap. But let me first explain what we mean by the gap. How's that?
Sure, absolutely.
And I know we have another slide on that we should show people, but let me still set some context here. So there's this gap, which is very frustrating and concerning, between leaders' perceptions, mm-hmm. and younger employees' perceptions, let's say. Sometimes employees' perceptions in general, but in this case, we're really focusing on the unique status of students and younger employees. And right, and the first thing I want to acknowledge is, and this again, I'm sort of sharing this with lots of empathy and compassion, which is so relevant, because gosh, a lot of stuff has happened that has created this perfect storm, this, God, why is it that we can't get on the same page? Well, we've already acknowledged it. We had the upheaval from the pandemic. We have remote work that nobody's figured out, and hybrid work. We've got tremendous changing demographics. We have political polarization, cultural polarization, the culture wars. Like, our world is stressed, right? We have the social media's impact. Your microphone's literally always on, leader, you know, and somebody's always expecting you to speak up, leader. And then we have all the stress and mental health issues that we've acknowledged. So all of this is creating conditions where employee expectations are different than they used to be. And here you are, trained as a CPA, trained as a head of marketing, trained as, you weren't trained to be an inclusion expert.
Right.
And again,
but we all know what it feels like, right? We know what inclusion feels like, but it's that thing that I've never been asked to put it into words until now. And so now I have to think, what does it feel like for me? And now how do I create that for others?
Yeah, right? Exactly. So the point is, you may be doing it and not know you're doing it, but this is helping give you, it's, you know, the context you need, and hopefully helping you fill in gaps that might be missing. So yeah, so like we said, inclusion is this expectation, right? And there's some great information here.
Yeah.
94% of folks in the Gen Z age cohort expect their companies to take a stand on important social issues.
I wanted to I'm glad you raised that one, because in candidates today looking for jobs, not just Gen Z, but generally speaking, they're looking to see if you are demonstrating your commitment. Is your company doing things, your organization doing things to prove the things that you put on your career opportunities page on your website?
Right.
And it's not just that you are showing you have a DEI commitment, but that you are being a good corporate citizen in what they define as good, which means everybody's not going to be a good match, right? But you have to know that as an organization, you should be, do leaders need to tell you what they believe, or is it that organizations need to acknowledge what's happening? I mean, when I say important social issues, what is Gen Z expecting corporate America to do?
All of the above.
And if you don't, right?
Well, I think all of the above. What you absolutely don't want to do is just post on social media, because that really gets into performative allyship, right? We don't want to do that. And young people especially will see right through that. You do need to do it. So you're going to message about it. You're going to talk about it.
Right.
But then you want to align your policies and programs around it. And by the way, here's a great example that's going to be really relevant, because we're coming up on Black History Month.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're going to post about Black history, and you're going to hold a special event maybe and have a speaker, but are you going to support Black businesses?
Yeah.
That's what I'd love to see you doing.
But
right?
But even if you are, you don't want to go around and say, hey, I supported 3 this week. I mean, so that's the kind of example, though, that how do you demonstrate it? That's a little bit more challenging. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to go ahead and launch the next poll. I want to make sure we're pacing them throughout. Autumn, just interrupt us, because we've been running way over on the minute. Just interrupt us and then push let us see what the results are.
Sure, I've gone ahead and launched that third poll. I'll check in with you in a minute.
Literally a minute. You were saying, Trish?
That's okay. Yeah, I know that we're broadening the topic a little bit here, right? Right around. So what do you do to really walk the talk and not just talk about it around inclusion? And I went down a path around Black History Month that's coming up. But more importantly, maybe, or not more importantly, but maybe more relevant for people on this call is, well, what I'm going to do is make sure that I really support my underrepresented employees, right? And I don't just say, you know, you matter to us, but I make sure you have the resources you need to thrive. Again, great story. So a young Black woman who I mentor, who works in a very large CPA firm, said, you know, when I joined this firm, a lot of things were done really well to help me on board. She said they connected me with other young Black people coming into the organization. There is a Black ERG. But she said, then it dropped off. Like once I got onboarded, that all kind of went away, and I've been here a while. And I don't think anybody recognizes that I needed more, that it needed to not just sort of end after I was onboarded. So there's a great example of what are you doing to sustain things you're doing for folks when they're first joining your company. Does that make sense?
It does, and I don't know if you see the poll is closed and the results are up. And it's interesting because 26% are the largest generation, say they're millennials, and then 25% weren't sure, but then the next biggest one is Gen X and then boomers, which completely aligns with the data. It does. Not surprising at all.
It does.
I know we're not supposed to do this, Autumn, but can we go ahead and do the next polling question too?
Yeah, I can put it up.
Which
all
had
right,
the biggest
so the fourth
impact on
poll is live on your screen. I'll check in with you in a minute.
Okay. While that's open, Trish, there's a person put in a comment here. I just wanted to read it and hear your reaction. I am in the boomer generation and thought that working from home would be a good idea, but I miss seeing people in the office and wish I hadn't changed. I'm too close to retirement to look for another job, and I don't have the energy to do that. I feel left out and isolated. I'm so happy for you sharing that with us because we're talking about it as a generational divide, but it's not the same for all generations or in the same generation.
Yeah, and in some cases, it's not the same because, again, it goes back to that story we were sharing earlier of the young person who never even realized what she was missing until she went in the office, right?
Right.
So
and
this
the opposite of that
has shared, right, this person who has shared this wonderful comment, thank you so much for that, and question kind of is you saw the other side of it when that connection mattered and helped you so much. You're not alone, by the way. Loneliness is at epidemic levels.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Surgeon General put out a report about mental health crisis last fall, I believe it was, that we're experiencing in this country, period.
And loneliness was a gigantic piece of that. And working remotely doesn't help with that problem at all. I know on a personal level, I found that I am so extroverted, and connection is what I'm all about. And I definitely got depressed from my work from home when it happened. And I have developed all sorts of interventions, and they've really helped a lot, and people really need to do that.
That's interesting that you share that. Well, if we're getting personal here for a minute, I am an extrovert in many ways, but I am socially an introvert. And so I found that being home helped me feel less of that social stress, because when I'm out in a non-professional setting, put me on the stage doing a training in a meeting, fine. But the minute we start having the small talk, I get really anxious. And so a lot of that was cut out through Zoom. So it's just, this is the point, that it's having a different effect on all of us. By the way, when you look at, I don't know if you can see the poll results, but 52% said remote work has had the biggest impact on them. The next one was 20% said stress and mental health issues. And then after that, 10% changing demographics, and only 6% social media's impact. So, but all of these different impacts are there by different participants in the audience. I do want to make sure we touch on this, because you were talking about all of this as data. The data is right here on this slide. On the left side of the side, we have leaders think they're doing a great job. And then on the right side, we have, well, not so much. If you ask others what they think of the same thing, it's not often aligned, is it?
It's not. And again, I think that the good news, this is the tough news, right? And you need to know it so that you can heed it. The good news is that you're here in participating in this webinar because you care about this stuff, and there is a lot you can do to overcome it or to avoid it. But yeah, know that it's real. Know that your perception, if you are a leader, may be quite different than the perceptions of, you know, your employees, and especially your younger employees.
I mean, I'm just
yeah,
going down this. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
It's so odd because there's that slight lag, right, between you and I, so it gets a little awkward. But if I just go line by line here, so majority of leaders believe they're creating basically an inclusive environment, but only 28% of employees think that their employer's actions are actually doing that. I don't know if you had any thoughts you want to share as I go down here. 90% of CEOs say their culture is positive. Majority of leaders are viewed as lacking compassion and are unaware of how their employees are doing. So is this leadership cluelessness, or is it wishful thinking? Are they not assessing the do they not have their finger on the pulse?
I think it's all of the above, you know, and remember that this is data coming from across broad industry,
yes.
Right? That's important to recognize. I want to jump, and I feel like we kind of touched on a couple of these. I would love to jump to the Gallup information there on the left that says that the vast majority, thanks for putting that back. It's right there, yeah. The vast majority of HR leaders think their organization has made changes that have improved diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. That's an overwhelming statistic.
Yeah.
But look at the feelings from employees. They think that a lot of their needs when it comes to DEIB are not being met. That's really concerning. And sometimes what I think around all of this, which kind of goes back to your question from a few minutes ago, how much of this is about communication?
I'd say all of it.
Yeah, like the woman who told me the story, who said, you know, I'm a young Black woman. I came into this organization. They took care of me, then they stopped. Well, is it that they stopped, or is there a communication gap where she doesn't even know all of the resources and supports that could be there for her because maybe it's just not being communicated? Right. I think that that's often the case. And, you know, there's also this data out there, I'm very data driven. There's also this data out there that basically says most leaders absolutely under communicate compared to what they believe they're doing. So, well, you know you got to say it and say it and say it and say it in different ways and do it in different ways.
It's your third from the bottom bullet here, communicate constantly. The challenge, though, is leaders are the last ones to get substantive, meaningful, constructive feedback. Feedback tends to go down.
That's right.
It is not safe to give feedback upward.
That's right.
You know, you are putting yourself at potential political risk, or if you say something and it isn't believed by your leader. So, I mean, how do you do that? How can leaders do these very same things if they are completely unaware that they need to do these things?
Right. So again, culture change, systems and processes, right? Like there should absolutely be a safe, efficient, effective system for getting that feedback to the senior folks. Yeah. You know, that reminds me of a story. Reverse mentoring can actually help with this. It's only one way, by the way. I'm not discounting all the other formal approaches, but leaders are often disconnected with their younger people. And I have a client who was the CEO and knew that they had some problems around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in their company, and was trying. And one of the many things we did is we set up reverse mentoring for him and some of the other senior leaders. But he started it, which I loved. He was, you know, a in the workplace, an older white man, and he owned it. He was like, yeah, so I have had a very different journey than a lot. My workforce has become so much diverse than a lot of my employees. And so a really young gay man mentored him. And this, did I say he was white and he was straight, the CEO? So he got reverse mentored by a young gay man. And they got to know each other. And I'm telling you, it would give you goosebumps if you sort of saw the journey that they ended up going on together. They had never known each other, didn't understand each other, had made assumptions about each other that were absolutely inaccurate. You know, the biases of the stories we make up about people before we know who they are, right? I wish that were my quote. It's Bernia Myers. And so, you know, that says it all. And that's what they were doing. And so they started meeting like once a month, but they did it for like a year. And wow, both their eyes were wide open. So the purpose of the reverse mentoring was to help the senior executive, but indeed it helped both, right? It always does, the power of mentoring. And afterwards, the senior executive said things like, I literally had no idea the journey he had been on. I never knew. I assumed that this was an organization that was no problem for him to be out, that it was easy, blah, 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 blah. And of course, this young person educated him about all sorts of other relevant issues that young people cared about in his organization. But this young person ends up saying, I had no idea what a wonderful human he was. And he couldn't help that he didn't know. His life experience had never allowed him to know. And the beauty of human connection there, right? And mentoring.
Well, I mean, that's the value of lived experience. You said this, okay? You said this, it was on our very first call. Where did you write that? I can't walk in your shoes, but I do know what it feels like to be the only and to navigate something hard. That's almost a direct quote from you because I wrote it in my notes. And that's what you're talking about here. I can't know what it's like to be Trish. Trish, you can't know what it's like to be me, but we both can learn from each other. And when I have conversations with you and learn from you, I can realize so much that we have in common, as well as see the world through a different lens, understand different experiences, and recognize that there are a whole lot of different ways things will impact you, where things might create opportunities. You mean that's a problem? I didn't realize that was a problem. It's good to know this now. There are so many things that we can learn. And in this session, we're talking about the generational divide. But what you're talking about is also true gender-wise. It's true in terms of ability or disability or different abilities. In every dimension of difference, there's opportunities for learning about the other person's experiences and backgrounds.
1000% right. A very simple grassroots effort in one very large company was to start doing coffee and connects with people you didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's used in many places now, but it didn't used to be. And it came about because, you know, you said, maybe, Jina, I don't know anybody who's not on my team. I'm in my silo. Mm-hmm. I'm tired of it. I'm frustrated by it. I don't know what they're doing across, you know, down the hallway. I'm going to start getting together with this person, and I'm not going to talk about work when we get together. I'm going to focus on getting to know Trish, getting to know Jina, right? Getting to know Edward. And we're going to spend time just doing that. And it spread like wildfire and actually then became a key pillar in this organization's DEI strategy.
It's amazing how this stuff works.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, so many of these solutions are not expensive, right? But they require intentionality. They're not going to happen accidentally. They're going to happen because you decide this is important and we're going to do something about it. And you might empower the people in your organization to say, you suggest the things we should do, because from a top-down approach, I might not know what you need, but you know what could help.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to just say, because I know we're going to run out of time here, I personally, so this is backed by research and data, but I will admit it's my personal passion. I cannot say enough, if you do nothing else after you leave here today, get really focused on mentoring of all kinds, peer mentoring, reverse mentoring, mentor young people. They need it desperately. And in addition to mentoring, I would say if there's anything you can do to provide employee resource groups of some kind, and even if you're a smaller organization, there are ways to do that.
Right.
Because people just need that, they need to come together around
Affinity.
shared values, shared identities. They need that safe place. So those are, and again, neither of those costs much at all. People get overwhelmed by the notion of it, but you can start small. You can start with pilots.
Yep, absolutely. Or you can start by leveraging programs that exist outside the organization rather than having to create something internally.
Yeah, exactly.
So just so you know, there's a lot of questions that have come in, and many of them are comments, but I wanted to make sure we have time because there aren't usually this many that come in. So putting on my reading glasses, folks. Why would Gen Z expect their well-being to be prioritized in the workplace when it was not their last job? When it was not in their last job, college job, which clearly does not prioritize their well-being. So, and this person was a professor at a university. So I think what this person is saying is your college wasn't prioritizing your well-being. Why would you expect your employer to?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the earlier discussion we had, and I don't know whether this person was on the entire time, but I would disagree a little bit. I think maybe depending on the school you're at, they're not, but I know where I worked, student well-being was highly prioritized. And it often is. And so that's number one. But number two, the focus on well-being because of all these other experiences people have had, the stress that exists in the world, the loneliness, the depression that is at epidemic rates, the pandemic that affected people. So there's a need that perhaps didn't used to exist. And then there's an expectation for some students depending on their college journey.
I would also add one other factor there, and that is that I might not know that this is something I need because I wouldn't articulate it or I haven't personally experienced it, but then I get to work and things are missing. It's like the first story that you shared. And so I think sometimes you can't put words to it and you can't name it, but the data tells us that this is happening. So, all right, this next question, how can we balance our expectations when we fill out a work application? This question actually came up with me in a training that I did earlier this week. How am I supposed to know that they're doing the things that they say they're doing or they're not doing? How can I know this when I'm just applying for the job?
Well, and I'd welcome other people to chime in here, right? But there is a lot more transparency than there used to be. Remember, Glassdoor and lots of other sites exist. So these students, these young people are checking you out in a big way. Are they going to find out everything? No. And do we also know that there are subcultures within any organization? Of course. You know, this is a very imperfect world we live in. So, so a subculture can mean, right, that in one part of the company, it's incredibly inclusive and everything that person wants is there, and in another part, not at all.
Yeah, or just group dynamics are going to be different. Right. This goes back to and is reinforced by your point. Communicate often, communicate regularly. Say what you are experiencing. Say what you're struggling with. Say what has been working. Ask for other ideas. Communication isn't always, we are inclusive. Communication are all of the things that convey you are inclusive without saying it explicitly. And I think maybe that's part of the solution.
Absolutely. And you kind of said it, but I'm going to underscore it. Be honest about setbacks. Be honest about what you're not getting right. Employees value that. You know, it's okay to say, we're not quite where we want to be on this, or, you know, on hiring or retention, but here's what we're doing about it. And you can be part of the solution, by the way. That's another way by saying, by the way, that we haven't talked about enough, which is you're not just going to expect more of these young people while you're helping them, right? Because we talked about giving tough love.
We're going to collaborate.
Include them in the process of addressing the problems. Yeah.
Somebody is asking, Okay, let me not act like I can read. Somebody is asking, how can I be transparent about a disparity issue without being insensitive? I'm looking at the time, by the way. We have like about 3 minutes,
Yeah.
3 or 4 minutes.
I think I'm going to do my best to interpret that. So how can I be transparent about a disparity issue? So maybe something that has maybe a microaggression that's occurred without, what was the second half of it? I'm sorry.
Without being insensitive.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. It's such a great question. I'm going to assume that I've got your question right, which is this is where having the ability to hold conversations or dialogue that is challenging, that is difficult,
Mhm.
is essential. And there's actually training. People like both of us talking on this webinar offer that kind of training. It is so deeply valuable to learn how to hold conversations across difference of any kind.
Yes.
And there's literally a framework. There's literally training where you learn to address issues with compassion, without judgment, to learn more. We could, again, it's a whole other webinar.
I actually did a webinar on this yesterday, if anybody
Okay.
wants to look for it.
Yeah.
It was one that was sponsored by Bill. There are so many strategies for that.
Yeah.
The good news is there's no wrong one. It's just trying to find one that works. All right. Okay, I'm going to do one more. Let's see. This is more of a comment. Somebody said that they are introverted and so they get stressed when they go into the office, and remote work has been beneficial. I
Yeah.
panic and my stress is ridiculous when I have to return to the office. And Brenda, yes, in fact, let's launch that last polling question. Thank you, Brenda, for the reminder while we are doing this comment. So I don't know, and do you want to comment on that? Because that's the exact opposite of the value of coming into the office. It's the
Yeah.
protection and safety you get from staying home.
Yes. And you know what? We see that data as well. And I hope I've acknowledged that clearly, that there's a both and here. There
Mhm.
are upsides to remote work, there are downsides. And for anybody who is introverted, sometimes if you are also underrepresented, you feel like the only, not having to be in person sometimes really helps. It does give you protection. If you're an introvert, it can even be easier to participate because you're not competing with the extroverts who love to talk like me, right? So you can instead use the chat feature and get a question asked. There are things about it that are valuable, and I'm acknowledging it. I want to just add one word of caution.
Mhm.
For a lot of people who have any level of social anxiety, that's the time when we became isolated actually was not your friend.
Yeah.
Because and so if social anxiety is something you need to work on, I'm just going to encourage you to get help with that and not use your screen as your retreat always.
Yeah.
I hope that helps. I'm
Yeah, no,
acknowledging both sides of this.
yeah, thank you. No, I appreciate that. There was an article that I read earlier this week that showed that bringing employees back into the office did not positively impact profitability the way companies might have thought, which invites leaders to really be more open about this instead of focusing it so much on the bottom line or butts and seats. But productivity, performance, engagement, and all of those are harder to measure.
Yeah.
But the data is, you have data on the slides, you've talked about this, the data is there and it tells us that this type of connectivity and culture is what is going to drive profitability and performance. And we need to be thoughtful about this because our workplace is becoming more diverse, period. And so we're not going to get away from that. What we need to do is find ways to work through and across difference.
Absolutely.
You got what, 30 seconds or so, final thought?
Jina, are we able to put that one other slide up that gave kind of a bunch of just best practices of what people can do? And if not, that's
no, it's okay. I'm putting it up on the screen because everyone, you have the handout, and all of these slides are there. Please go through and look at these, and because there's something on here for everybody.
that's for sure, Jina. That's why I wanted to make sure people saw this, because I feel like this is a real like mashup of different things, and certainly there's something on here that's going to work for everybody.
Remember, it doesn't all cost money. Some of it is absolutely free.
Yeah. Just remember that students are coming to you with certain perceptions before they leave school and they enter the workplace, and some of those perceptions are going to be affirmed and others aren't, right? Many students may think that, bias isn't even going to be a problem anymore in the workplace. Inclusion isn't going to be a problem. We've made so much progress, and they're going to have a rude awakening. I get that. Remember to approach this, I think, with an open mindset, curiosity. This is a young generation with tremendous talent.
Yeah.
And they are ready to give.
Yep.
They're navigating their journey.
Thank you, Trish. I appreciate this conversation. We could have gone on and on. We are going to hit up here on time. Before we wrap up, I do want to invite people. This webinar series is now monthly. It's been bi-weekly in the past, but it's monthly. And coming up next month is Ingrid Edstrom, and we're going to be talking about JEDI. That's justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and why it's important for us to be able to facilitate those conversations. It's basically picking up where we're leaving off.
Right.
So join us. Registration isn't open yet, but mark your calendars if you'd like to join us. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Trish, for being here with me. And with that, we're at time. I think Autumn will hand it back to you to close us out.